Hi, and welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist video series. I am Phil Long, Precision Agronomy Advisor with Latham High-Tech Seeds. And this week, as you can see, we're out in the shop, and I want to talk about keeping residue out of the furrow. Keeping residue out of the furrow will help you achieve that ideal stand, get all your corn plants and soybean plants to emerge as evenly as you possibly can. And the one thing that I most commonly see out in the field is, unfortunately, residue in the furrow. So how can we avoid it? The first tip that I have would be actually before planting, and that's more related to tillage. So going back to even last fall and with your primary tillage and even this spring as you're getting prepared to do it, in high residue situations or corn on corn situations especially, I see this a lot, too much mixing of residue into the top few inches, and we end up with a lot of residue in the furrow, and we have corn seeds sitting there right next to a piece of residue. And unfortunately, when corn doesn't get good seed to soil contact, that's why that's so important. Close the row and make sure that's ideal seed depth. We end up with poor emergence, and a lot of times the seed's rotting in the ground. So tillage and making sure you're not mixing too much of that residue, if you have a lot of residue out there, is really important. The next thing I would say, also on a tillage related thing, is at the front of the planter. We got a row cleaner sitting here, but before that, if you're in no-till situations, high residue, if you have a no-till coulter, my recommendation, especially if it's ahead of your row cleaners, is to take it off. A lot of times they cause more challenges than they do rewards or benefits to your planter. If they're in front of the row cleaner, they're going to be hitting that residue. Obviously the path's not cleared. They work well in a lot of situations on some planters, but when it comes to corn especially, it's going to hairpin that residue. The row cleaner is likely not going to move it because it's below those, and then we're going to end up with it at the bottom of the seed trench. These should not be getting that deep, as we'll talk about here in a second, but my recommendation is if it's in front, to remove that if you're trying to get better stands. If it's behind the row cleaner or integrated as part of the row cleaner, then it's not as big of an issue. So the job of the row cleaner really primarily is to move the residue out of not only the seed or the disc openers, but also those gauge wheels. We want a clear path for those to ride on so that it's smooth, so we can achieve that uniform depth. So their primary goal is to move that far enough, usually about 10 or so inches out, so that we have a clear path of soil to work with for our seed openers and our gauge wheels. There's a couple types, obviously, you see on many planters, and depending on your situation, you'll have a different situation than what we got here. This is a floating row cleaner. And in this case, it has the treader wheels on the side here. You can see leaves about an inch and a half or so out, that does the work, does the light tillage, and moves that residue out of the way. If you have pin-up or adjustable row cleaners, obviously they don't follow the contour of the land. It's a little more challenging to adjust them, but make sure that you're monitoring them as you're going through the field, and make sure they're not running all the time. They should run when they hit residue, root balls, and so forth, or clods, and move them out of the way. But make sure that they're not digging trenches. You don't want your row cleaners to be doing tillage. Even if it's a floating row cleaner or you have air or some kind of hydraulics on this to put down pressure, it still should not be digging a trench, because that affects moisture and so forth and what you're planting into. It changes that seed depth from your original soil bed that you had before. So make sure that you're paying attention to that, just watching them as you go through, or have somebody watch them as you start planting. The other thing that you can do with these, you'll see where they mesh together up here in the front, an adjustment that can be made if you're dealing with high residue or maybe cover crops or something. They'll tend to fight for the residue if they're meshing like this right together right up front. That's how many of them come and are adjusted. There is options, and there's more holes back in here that you can put one on a leading edge so that one trails and one leads, and that way they're not fighting for the residue. So there are some adjustments that can be made there as well. So just make sure as you're going into planting season this spring to pay attention to these. Stop, not only pay attention to your seed depth, but also pay attention to the row cleaners, because they're doing a very important job keeping that residue out of the way so that your seed openers don't have to mess with it and your corn doesn't have to be next to residue this spring. So thanks for watching this week's Ask the Agronomist. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at 1-877-GO-LATHAMS, or visit us on our website at lathamseeds.com.